Voters, it would seem, are dragging their heels when it comes to casting their ballots in this year's local body elections. Only 20% of voting papers had been returned by yesterday, compared with 30% at the same time in 2010. Associate Professor Janine Hayward from the University of Otago Department of Politics is with us this evening to talk about the situation. Good evening, Janine.
Good evening.
Now, as we just heard, the voting figures are so far the worst in the city's last three local body elections. Do you think we're going to see a last-minute upswing?
You would certainly hope so. We are famous for leaving things to the last minute. So I remain optimistic that there may be, an upswing in votes, but it's certainly not a good trend at this stage. It is worse than we normally are in terms of where the turnout's at this point.
Now, 2004 saw the highest voted turnout in the last three local body elections. Nearly 55% of voters' voting papers returned, which doesn't really seem like a lot on the scale of things. Are those respectable figures, or should we expect a higher turnout?
By international standards, actually, those are fairly respectable figures. Some countries would be pleased to have that in their national elections, but we shouldn't be complacent about that. Elections are really important in the way our government works and our constitution's organised. Elections and democracy are right at the heart of it, so we should never be complacent about our voter turnout.
What factors are known to influence voter turnout?
For the most part, people will say, when they're surveyed or asked, that it's because they're just not confident that they know the candidates and know enough about them. And, you'll have heard people say that, you might even feel that yourself. And there's all kinds of factors that we know make that easier or worse for them at each election. So if we have a really important issue that stirs things up, that helps people get the information that they need. If there's a good race between a couple of candidates, that'll also help. And as much as the local media can do, always helps to get people engaged with the candidates.
Does the method of voting have an impact? We're talking postal votes versus polling booths here.
There are there is some evidence that that can have an effect, but there's such a range of issues that we are talking about when we look at voter turnout and what affects it, that's really just one of a number of things to consider.
Now, compared to national election campaigns, do we typically see a higher or lower proportion of people register their votes in local body?
Much higher proportion vote in national elections than in local elections, and that has a lot to do with a number of things. Of course, the national elections get much greater media coverage, and there are all kinds of other good cues for voters. People get to know their candidates much better.
What demographic do we most need to mobilise?
We need to be most concerned about the youth vote. That has always been the case. It's a particular issue for Dunedin because we have that large transient student population. What's changing is that we used to know that people were slow to get voting when they were young, but there was some point, probably when they started paying a mortgage or having a job, that they got interested in voting. That's actually changing, and we can see now that people, once they've had that habit of not voting, are much less likely to vote even later in life, and that's why we're seeing this decline in turnout generally.
What do we need to do to change that behaviour?
It's really hard to say. I don't think there's any one fix. You can do some mechanical things like online voting or think about ways that you can make it easier for people, but I think there's a whole spectrum of options to consider, and some of them will have a lot to do with a really, much bigger reconsideration, particularly of the role of local government and how it can be relevant to people.
Now, there have been a lot of calls for online voting this particular local body election round. Do you really think that would make a huge difference?
I think it would make a difference for a particular kind of voter, and I would hope that it would, but I do think that there are a lot of obstacles to people voting before they get to that point of even filling in their ballot. So for those people, that won't make that much difference, but you would hope that anything that can improve turnout should be tried.
Associate Professor Janine Hayward, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.